The moment Ethan Hawthorne set foot on the property, the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. His German shepherd, Shadow, normally eager to explore new territory, hesitated at the tree line, hackles raised. "What's wrong, boy?" Ethan knelt beside his only trusted companion, running a hand through the dog's thick black fur. Shadow whined, dark eyes fixed on the dilapidated cabin that stood in the small clearing like a wound in the pristine wilderness. Hello, wonderful viewers. I hope you're having an amazing day wherever you're watching from. Are you ready for a spine-tingling journey into the unknown? If you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, now's the perfect time to join our community of mystery lovers. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. For a man worth $28 billion, the purchase of the abandoned Miller's Peak cabin had been almost comically insignificant, a $500 transaction that his financial advisors hadn't even noticed among his quarterly expenditures. The listing had appeared mysteriously in his email one night during his usual insomnia. Historic mountain property, price to sell, cash only. Something about the crudely photographed cabin with its sagging porch and moss-covered roof had called to him, a feeling he couldn't explain. Now, standing before it in the fading October light, Ethan questioned his impulsive decision. The cabin looked even more decrepit in person, weathered gray logs crumbling at the corners, windows like vacant eyes, the front door hanging slightly ajar as if reluctantly inviting him in. "Mr. Hawthorne?" A voice from behind startled him. Ethan turned to find an elderly man in a worn flannel shirt, leaning heavily on a walking stick carved from mountain ash. "I'm Roy Daniels. I was town clerk when your paperwork came through." Ethan extended his hand. "Nice to meet you. I appreciate you driving up here to give me the keys." Roy didn't take the offered hand, nor did he approach any closer. "Didn't come to give you keys. Came to give you a warning." His voice carried the weight of the mountains themselves. "This place has a history. Bad things happen to folks who try to live here." "So, I've heard," Ethan replied, trying to keep his tone light. The property records had been sparse, but the real estate agent had reluctantly mentioned the local superstitions after the sale was final. Stories of owners who vanished without a trace, of nightmares so terrible they drove people to madness, of whispers that came from beneath the floorboards. "It ain't superstition," Roy said, as if reading Ethan's thoughts. 5 owners in the last century. 3 disappeared completely. 1 hung himself in the big oak out back. Last one, Meredith Sawyer, she made it almost a year before they found her walking naked down the highway, speaking in tongues. Shadow growled softly, still staring at the cabin. "I appreciate your concern," Ethan said, "but I'm just planning to renovate and use it occasionally as a riding retreat. I'm not particularly superstitious." Roy's weathered face creased with something between pity and fear. "It ain't about believing in ghosts, son. It's about respecting what you don't understand." He reached into his pocket and withdrew not a key, but a small, leather-bound journal with cracked binding. "Meredith left this. Said it should go to the next owner. I've kept it all these years, hoping there wouldn't be one." Ethan accepted the journal, feeling an unexpected weight to the small book. What happened to her? Died in the state hospital 2 months after they found her. Never spoke another word anyone could understand. Roy took a step back. "The property's yours legal, so I can't stop you. But there's a reason that cabin went for $500 when the land alone is worth millions." With that cryptic warning, the old man turned and began the slow trek back down the overgrown driveway toward his waiting truck. Ethan watched him go, the journal heavy in his hand. Shadow pressed against his leg, still unusually tense. "It's just an old cabin, boy," Ethan murmured, as much to himself as to the dog. "Nothing we can't handle." As if in response, a sudden gust of wind swept through the clearing, rattling the cabin's loose shutters. The door, previously ajar, swung open fully with a prolonged creak that sounded almost like a sigh of anticipation. Shadow barked once, sharp, authoritative, as if issuing his own warning. Ethan straightened his shoulders and approached the cabin, each step crunching on the carpet of dead leaves. The tech world knew him as a brilliant, reclusive innovator, the founder of quantum core technologies who had revolutionized quantum computing before retreating from public view after the tragic accident that took his parents and sister 5 years ago. What they didn't know was how empty his life had become, how the sprawling Seattle mansion and the private island felt more like gilded cages than homes. Perhaps that's why he'd bought this decrepit cabin in a town he'd never heard of. Perhaps he was seeking something authentic, something real, even if that reality came with a disturbing history. The interior of the cabin was a single large room with a massive stone fireplace dominating one wall. Dust motes danced in the shafts of dying sunlight that penetrated the grimy windows. A rustic wooden table, 2 chairs, a sagging bookshelf, and an iron-framed bed with a bare mattress constituted the only furniture. "Home sweet home, for now," Ethan said, dropping his backpack on the table. Shadow refused to cross the threshold, sitting stubbornly at the entrance. "Come on, boy. We need to get settled before dark." As Ethan moved to light the lantern he'd brought, the cabin had no electricity yet. He heard a sound that made him freeze, a soft, rhythmic tapping coming from somewhere beneath the floorboards, like impatient fingers waiting for attention. Shadow's growl rumbled from the doorway. "Probably just an animal," Ethan muttered, though he felt the hairs on his arms rise. He busied himself with unpacking essentials and building a fire in the grate to combat the deepening chill. The old stone fireplace was well constructed, with a heavy cast iron grate that swung outward for cleaning. As he laid, kindling in the firebox, his fingers brushed against something on the underside of the grate, a small metal handle, almost invisible unless you were looking for it. Curious, Ethan pulled the handle. With surprising ease, a section of the stone hearth slid to one side, revealing a trapdoor set into the floor, bound with rusted chains and secured with a padlock so ancient it had nearly fused shut with corrosion. Shadow's barking became frantic, desperate. The journal Roy had given him suddenly felt like it was burning through the pocket of Ethan's jacket. As darkness fell completely outside, the only light now coming from his lantern, Ethan withdrew the small book with trembling fingers. On the first page, written in faded, frantic script, were words that made his blood run cold. "Asterisk if you found the door beneath the hearth. You've already gone too far. The voices are real. The shadows move when you're not looking. And whatever you do, don't open the lock. They've been waiting for Hawthorne to return for over 50 years. Ethan nearly dropped the journal. Hawthorne, his family name. The name he'd been born with before his grandfather changed it after fleeing this very mountain range decades ago. How could Meredith Sawyer have known who would buy the cabin after her? How could she have known his original family name, a secret he'd only discovered himself after his parents' death? As these questions raced through his mind, the tapping beneath the trapdoor grew louder, more insistent. And then, unmistakably, a voice, faint but clear, called his name from below. "Ethan, welcome home." What dark secret lay beneath the cabin's floorboards? And why did it seem to be waiting specifically for him? Quick pause if you're loving this. Hit like and subscribe button now to help the channel grow. Let's continue. Ethan stumbled backward, nearly knocking over the lantern. Shadow's barking had intensified to a frenzy, the loyal shepherd now pacing anxiously at the threshold, refusing to enter but unwilling to leave his master. "Calm down, boy," Ethan whispered, though his own heart hammered against his ribs. He stared at the chained trapdoor, straining to hear the voice again, but the cabin had fallen into an unnatural silence. Even the wind outside seemed to have stilled. He flipped through Meredith Sawyer's journal with trembling hands, searching for answers. The handwriting deteriorated with each entry, beginning with neat, methodical observations about the cabin's history and ending in nearly illegible scrawls that sometimes spiraled around the margins. Between these extremes lay fragments of a disturbing narrative. April 12th. Found newspaper clippings hidden in the wall behind a bookcase. 6 people went missing from Miller's Peak in 1972. All visitors to the Hawthorne mine. April 29th. The tapping started tonight. Like Morse code, but I can't decipher it. Always strongest near the fireplace. May 15th. Dreams about a room filled with gold. A man with a face like a skull. He keeps saying, the debt must be paid. June 3rd. Found the trapdoor. It's chained for a reason. I want to open it. I won't. June 10th. The voice called me by name today. It knows things about me no one could know. Says it's been waiting. The entries grew increasingly erratic after that, describing shadows that moved independently of their owners, whispers that came through the walls, and a persistent voice that promised answers to questions Meredith hadn't even asked. The final entry, dated 2 weeks before Roy said she was found wandering the highway, contained just 7 words. The Hawthorns owe a debt. It's coming due. Asterisk. Ethan closed the journal, his mouth dry. He'd never known much about his family history. His grandfather, Victor, had changed their surname from Hawthorne to Hawthorne when he relocated the family from Appalachia to Seattle in the 1970s. Growing up, the past was a forbidden topic. Any questions about their origins met with stern silence. It wasn't until after the car accident that claimed his parents and sister that Ethan discovered the original family name while sorting through his father's belongings. A single weathered photograph had fallen from an old Bible, a group of stern-faced men standing before a mine entrance. Hawthorne's Silver Mine, Miller's Peak, 1971, written on the back in faded ink. When he'd asked his grandfather about it, during one of their rare conversations, the old man had grown pale. Some histories are better left buried, he'd said. Some debts you don't want to inherit. Victor died 3 months later, taking whatever secrets he held to his grave. Now, staring at the chain trapdoor that seemed to pulse with malevolent energy, Ethan wondered if he'd stumbled upon exactly what his grandfather had tried to escape. His phone buzzed, the unexpected sound making him jolt. The screen displayed a message from Nora Chun, his executive assistant, the only person who had his private number. Asterisk. Coordinates you sent led me to Miller's Peak. Historical Society says property belonged to Hawthorne Mining Company until 1972. Company dissolved after incident. Details sealed in county records. Need more time to dig deeper. P.S. Why are you buying abandoned cabins again? Ethan almost smiled despite the circumstances. Nora had been with him for 7 years, managing his business affairs with terrifying efficiency while respecting his need for privacy. She was probably the closest thing he had to a friend, beside Shadow. He quickly typed a response. Asterisk. Keep digging. Especially anything about my grandfather, Victor, and see if you can find records on previous cabin owners, particularly Meredith Sawyer. Asterisk. As he hit send, the temperature in the cabin plummeted suddenly. His breath fogged in the air, and the lantern flame flickered violently. Shadow's barking changed to a low, continuous growl. I should leave, Ethan muttered to himself. Any rational person would get back in their Land Rover and drive away. Forget this strange cabin and its mysteries. But something held him there. Curiosity, perhaps, or something deeper. A sense that answers he'd been seeking for years might lie beneath that chain trapdoor. His entire adult life had been built on discovering what others couldn't see. Quantum Core's breakthrough technology, the innovation that had made him billions, came from Ethan's ability to perceive patterns in quantum noise that everyone else dismissed as random. When others saw chaos, Ethan found meaning. Perhaps that's why he'd always felt so disconnected from the world. Even before the accident that took his family, Ethan had been a solitary figure, more comfortable with algorithms than people, finding patterns where others saw coincidence. The trauma of losing everyone he loved had only deepened his isolation. Only Shadow truly understood him now. The shepherd had been a rescue, found wandering near the scene of the accident, as broken and alone as Ethan himself. They had healed together, forming a bond that transcended ordinary companionship. And now Shadow was trying to warn him, desperate to protect him from whatever lay beneath the cabin floor. A sharp knock at the door startled Ethan from his thoughts. Shadow immediately positioned himself between Ethan and the entrance, teeth bared. Mr. Hawthorne, you still in there? It was Roy Daniels again. Ethan opened the door cautiously, finding the old man standing several feet back from the porch, a shotgun cradled in his arms. Saw your lights, Roy said by way of explanation. Figured I'd check if you were leaving or staying. I haven't decided yet, Ethan replied carefully, eyeing the shotgun. Roy nodded toward the weapon. Not for you. For what might follow you if you stay. His gaze moved past Ethan to the cabin interior, narrowing when he spotted the partially exposed trapdoor. So you found it already. Quicker than most. What is it? What's down there? Don't rightly know. No one who's opened it has lived long enough to tell the full story. Roy shifted his weight, looking suddenly older in the lantern light. But I know it connects to the old mine tunnels. The Hawthorne mine. Ethan's pulse quickened. You knew who I was when I bought this place. Suspected. You got the look. Same eyes as your grandfather. Different name, but same blood. Roy's voice dropped lower. Victor was smart to get out when he did. only survivor of what happened in 72. And what exactly happened? Roy's expression darkened. Official story was a collapse in the South Tunnel. 6 men trapped, bodies never recovered. But that's not what the old-timers whispered about. What did they whisper about? That Victor found something in those tunnels. Something valuable. Something that didn't belong to him. And that he made a bargain to keep it. Roy glanced nervously at the darkening forest beyond the clearing. Some say he betrayed the others to get out alive. Some say what he took comes with a price, a debt that passes down through blood. Shadow whined, pressing closer to Ethan's side. Listen to your dog, Mr. Hawthorne. Animals sense things we can't. Leave tonight. Burn that journal. Forget you ever heard of this place. Ethan thought of his grandfather, a bitter, frightened man who jumped at shadows and kept loaded guns in every room of his house. He'd always attributed Victor's paranoia to age and isolation, but now he wondered if the old man had spent decades looking over his shoulder, waiting for something to find him. I need to know the truth, Ethan said finally. About my family. About what happened here. Roy sighed heavily. Then God help you. Because nothing else will. He turned to go, then paused. If you insist on staying, there's someone you should talk to. Elena Reyes. Lives in the blue house at the edge of town. She was just a girl when it happened, but her father was one of the 6 who disappeared. If anyone knows anything about that day, it's her. After Roy departed, Ethan secured the cabin door and returned to the journal, reading deeper into Meredith's increasingly frantic entries. One passage caught his attention. Asterisk found old mining records hidden under floorboards. The South Tunnel collapse was a lie. The men were trying to seal something in, not dig something out. They were running from something, not to something. Only Victor Hawthorne made it to the surface. And now it wants out. Ethan closed the journal, his scientific mind battling with the growing dread in his gut. He'd never believed in the supernatural, had built his entire career on the principle that everything in the universe followed patterns and rules, even if humans couldn't always perceive them. Yet as the night deepened around the cabin, he couldn't dismiss the sensation of being watched. The weight of unseen eyes seemed to press upon him from all directions. Shadow refused to settle, pacing between Ethan and the door, occasionally stopping to growl at the chain trapdoor. When Ethan finally prepared for bed, laying out his sleeping bag on the dusty floor rather than the suspicious mattress, the shepherd positioned himself protectively beside him. "What do you sense, boy?" Ethan whispered, running his hand through Shadow's thick fur. "What's got you so worked up?" As if in answer, a new sound emerged from beneath the trapdoor. Not tapping this time, but a slow, rhythmic scratching like fingernails against wood. Despite his exhaustion, sleep eluded Ethan. He lay awake, listening to the scratching sounds as they moved from beneath the trapdoor to the walls, circling the cabin like something searching for a way in, or perhaps ensuring there was no way out. In the darkest hour of night, when his eyelids had grown heavy despite his anxiety, Ethan heard it again. The voice, closer now, as if someone had pressed their lips against the floorboards directly beneath his ear. "Ethan, help us. Free us. Like your grandfather promised." The voice was neither male nor female, but somehow both and neither, a composite of whispers that formed words. Ethan felt paralyzed, unable to move as cold breath ghosted across his face. Shadow growled, the sound rumbling through the shepherd's body where it pressed against Ethan's side. What did he promise? Ethan forced himself to ask, his scientific curiosity overriding his fear. "What does my family owe?" The answer came not in words, but in a vision that seemed to flash behind his closed eyelids. A tunnel deep beneath the earth, illuminated by lantern light. 6 men frantically working to seal a breach in the rock face. A darkness pouring through the opening like liquid shadow. His grandfather's face, young and twisted with terror, making a bargain with something ancient and hungry. "Your blood, your line. When the last Hawthorne returns, the way will open." That was the promise. Asterisk Ethan's eyes snapped open. The vision vanished, but its implications remained. With sudden, terrible clarity, he understood why his grandfather had changed their name, why he'd moved the family across the country, why he'd lived in constant fear. Victor Hawthorne hadn't escaped the mine by chance. He'd sacrificed his companions and made a promise to something inhuman. A promise that involved his descendants. A promise that Ethan, the last living Hawthorne, had unwittingly come to fulfill. As dawn finally broke over the mountains, Ethan made two decisions. First, he would visit Elena Reyes and learn everything she knew about the mine incident. And second, no matter what he discovered, he could not, open that trapdoor. What he didn't yet realize was that some choices had already been made for him, set in motion 50 years earlier by a desperate young man fleeing into the light, leaving his friends to the darkness. Quick pause if you're loving this. Hit like and subscribe button now to help the channel grow. Let's continue. The mountain roads glistened with morning dew as Ethan navigated his Land Rover toward town. Shadow sat alert in the passenger's seat, his amber eyes scanning the forest that pressed close on either side. Neither of them had slept well. The night had been punctuated by strange sounds, scratching within the walls, whispers that seemed to travel through the floorboards, and twice more, that unnervingly familiar voice calling Ethan's name. Miller's Peak was barely a town, just a cluttered main street with weathered storefronts, many of them boarded up or displaying for sale signs. The few locals visible on the sidewalks stopped to stare as Ethan's vehicle rolled past, their expressions ranging from curiosity to unmistakable hostility. Not exactly a warm welcome, Ethan muttered to Shadow. Let's find this blue house and get some answers. They located Elena Reyes' home at the eastern edge of town, a small blue cottage with a meticulously maintained garden. Wind chimes hung from the porch eaves, creating a discordant melody in the mountain breeze. As Ethan approached the front door, he noticed protective symbols painted in faded red around the frame, designs he recognized from his research into Appalachian folk magic. Hey there, amazing viewers. If you're enjoying this spine-tingling journey, hit that subscribe button right now. Drop a comment below telling me what you think is lurking beneath Ethan's cabin. I love reading your theories. Now, back to our story as Ethan discovers the terrible truth. Before he could knock, the door swung open, revealing a woman in her early 60s. Elena Reyes had the weathered complexion of someone who spent most of her life outdoors, deep lines bracketing intelligent, dark eyes. Her silver-streaked black hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and she wore a simple dress with an intricately embroidered shawl around her shoulders. "I've been expecting you," she said without preamble. "Roy called to say you'd be coming." Her gaze dropped to Shadow, who sat obediently at Ethan's side. "The dog can come too. Animals are better judges of character than people." The interior of Elena's cottage stood in stark contrast to the abandoned cabin. Warm, lived in, with walls lined with bookshelves and display cases containing crystals, dried herbs, and curious artifacts that Ethan couldn't immediately identify. The air smelled of sage and something deeper, earthier. "You look like him," Elena said as she poured tea into delicate cups. "Your grandfather. Same eyes, same way of holding yourself, like you're calculating everything around you." "You knew Victor?" Ethan accepted the tea, noting the strange symbols painted on the cup. "I knew all of them. The men who went into the mine that day." Something flickered in Elena's eyes, an old pain never fully healed. "My father, Miguel Reyes, was the foreman. Your grandfather was his partner and friend." Her mouth twisted on the final word. "I'm trying to understand what happened," Ethan said carefully. "The official record says there was a collapse, but there was no collapse." Elena's interruption was sharp, decisive. "That was the story the company put out. The story Victor insisted on. Then what really happened?" Elena studied him for a long moment. "Why did you buy that cabin, Mr. Hawthorne? Of all the places in the world a billionaire could go, why a decaying shack with a history of death?" The question caught Ethan off guard. Why had he been so compelled by that email, that crude listing? "I don't know," he admitted. "It felt important somehow, like I was supposed to find it." "Of course it did. The cabin called you here, just like it called all the others. But you're different. You have Hawthorne blood. The blood it's been waiting for." She leaned forward. "Did you open the trapdoor?" "No, it's still chained." Relief visibly washed over Elena's features. "Good. That gives us time." "Time for what?" "What was down there?" Elena rose and moved to one of the bookshelves, retrieving a worn leather binder. Inside were newspaper clippings, photographs, and handwritten accounts yellowed with age. In 1971, the Hawthorne mine was failing. Silver deposits had dwindled, and your grandfather was on the verge of bankruptcy. Then, miraculously, they struck a new vein, the richest anyone had ever seen in these mountains. She laid out photographs of miners proudly displaying chunks of ore. But the new tunnel went deeper than any previous excavation, almost directly beneath what is now your cabin. She turned a page, revealing a faded photograph of 6 men, one of whom Ethan recognized as a younger version of his grandfather. 2 months after they opened the new tunnel, the men began experiencing phenomena. Tools would vanish, only to appear in sealed sections of the mine. They heard voices coming from unmapped tunnels, voices that knew their names, their secrets. Some reported seeing their own doppelgangers walking ahead of them in the darkness. Shadow whined softly, pressing against Ethan's leg. My father started keeping a journal. Elena continued, turning to pages of tight, cramped handwriting. He believed they had breached something ancient, something that had been deliberately sealed away by the original inhabitants of this region. She looked up at Ethan. Have you ever heard of the Ajaccio? Ethan shook his head. They were here long before European settlers arrived. The Cherokee called them the Old Ones who dwell beneath. According to their legends, the Ajaccio discovered a doorway to somewhere else, a place of great power but terrible danger. When they realized what they had done, they sealed the doorway and appointed guardians to ensure it remained closed. You're talking about some kind of supernatural portal, Ethan said skeptically. Elena's expression hardened. I'm talking about what my father and 5 other men died to contain. What your grandfather promised to protect, then betrayed. She pulled out another document, a faded contract bearing Victor Hawthorne's signature. This was in my father's desk after he disappeared. It's a transfer of ownership of the entire mining operation to your grandfather, signed the day before the accident. Ethan examined the contract, noting the irregular signature, nothing like his grandfather's usual careful penmanship. It looked rushed, almost forced. Victor claimed he was outside the mine when the collapse happened. Elena continued. The sole survivor, suddenly the sole owner. Too distraught to even help with the search for bodies. Her voice turned bitter. He sealed the main entrance, sold the surrounding land for pennies, and left town within a week. The only part he kept was that cabin, the access point to the south tunnel entrance. Why would he keep it if he wanted to escape whatever happened? Insurance, perhaps. Or because he couldn't transfer it. Not legally. Elena Sigid. The cabin existed before the mine. Local legend says it was built by an Ajaccio descendant, specifically to guard the place where the barrier between worlds is thinnest. Shadow suddenly stood, hackles raised, growling at the cottage door. Elena went very still. We're being watched, she whispered. They know you're here, asking questions. Who knows? Ethan asked, but even as the words left his mouth, he understood. The presence from the cabin had followed him. Elena moved quickly to a cabinet, withdrawing a small cloth bag, which she pressed into Ethan's hand. Protection herbs. Keep them with you. She glanced nervously at the windows, where shadows seemed to move despite the bright morning light. You need to understand what happened that day in the mine. What Victor did. What he took. She reached for the final page in her binder, a map of the mine tunnels, with one section circled in red. The official survey never showed this chamber. My father discovered it just days before the incident. According to his notes, they found artifacts inside. Gold objects of a design no one recognized, embedded with stones that glowed without any light source. Bioluminescent minerals, Ethan suggested. Automatically, his scientific mind searching for rational explanations. And the gold could have been from an unknown pre-colonial civilization. Elena shook her head impatiently. The artifacts weren't just valuable, they were key. My father believed they were part of the seal that kept the doorway closed. When they were removed, a sharp crack interrupted her. The sound of one of the front windows fracturing despite no visible impact. Shadows growling intensified. You need to leave. Now. Elena hastily gathered the papers, shoving them into Ethan's hands. They're getting stronger. Your presence is feeding them. Hawthorne blood, fulfilling the promise. She gripped his arm with surprising strength. Victor made a bargain that night. His life for the others. But there was a condition, that a Hawthorne would return to open the way completely. Open what way? Ethan asked, rising as Shadow pawed anxiously at the door. The doorway beneath your cabin. Elena's eyes were wide with fear. What's down there isn't just a tunnel to the mine. It's a threshold to somewhere else. Something has been waiting 50 years for the last Hawthorne to return and complete what Victor started. Another window cracked, and then another. The wind chimes outside began to clang violently despite the still air. Shadow barked frantically. "Go!" Elena pushed him toward the door. "And whatever you do, don't open that trapdoor." Ethan rushed to his vehicle, Shadow leaping in ahead of him. As they pulled away, he glanced in the rearview mirror and froze. Elena stood on her porch, but she wasn't alone. Surrounding her were shadowy figures, barely visible in the daylight, their forms rippling like heat mirages. The drive back to the cabin seemed to take both an eternity and no time at all. Ethan's mind raced, trying to process Elena's warnings, to reconcile them with his scientific worldview. Part of him wanted to keep driving, to leave Miller's Peak and its mysteries behind forever. But the larger part, the part that had built his fortune by pursuing the unexplainable, needed answers. His phone rang as he pulled up to the cabin. "Nora, tell me you're not still at that creepy cabin," she said without preamble. "I'm still here. What did you find?" "Nothing good." Her voice was tight with concern. "County records were mostly destroyed in a fire in 1972, but I managed to access some of the investigation files. 6 men reported missing, presumed dead. Your grandfather was the last person to see them alive. Was he ever suspected of involvement in their disappearance?" Initial interviews suggest the investigators had questions, but they were dropped suddenly. And get this, 3 weeks after the incident, Victor deposited nearly $2 million in a Seattle bank. For a man who was reportedly on the verge of bankruptcy, that's quite a reversal of fortune. The implications were clear. He stole whatever they found in the mine, Ethan murmured, then left his friends to die. "There's more," Nora continued. "I looked into Meredith Sawyer. Before she bought the cabin, she was a respected archaeologist specializing in pre-colonial American artifacts. She came to Miller's Peak researching local legends about the Ajacha people, the old ones who dwell beneath," Ethan said, remembering Elena's words. "Exactly. Her last published paper theorized that the Ajachu had discovered a naturally occurring quantum anomaly, a place where the barriers between possible realities were unusually thin. Academic colleagues dismissed it as pseudoscience." Ethan's gaze drifted to the cabin. Quantum anomalies were precisely what his company researched. The foundation of his groundbreaking technology was the discovery that quantum states could be manipulated to access theoretical information spaces previously thought unreachable. "I need to see what's under that trapdoor," he said quietly. "Ethan, no." Nora's voice sharpened with alarm. "Whatever happened to those people, to Meredith, it's not worth the risk. Come back to Seattle. Let me send a research team. I'll call you back," he said, ending the call despite her protests. Shadow refused to re-enter the cabin, planting himself firmly outside despite Ethan's coaxing. Finally, Ethan had to proceed alone, acutely aware of the shepherd's anxious whining from the porch. Inside, everything was exactly as they had left it, yet somehow different. The air felt charged, expectant. The trapdoor was still chained, but the metal links seemed to have corroded further overnight, rust flaking away at the slightest touch. Ethan knelt beside it, Elena's warnings echoing in his mind. Whatever lay beneath had taken 6 lives in 1972 and ruined countless others since. Yet it was also connected to the scientific breakthrough that had defined his career: quantum anomalies, barriers between realities. His grandfather had found something valuable in that mine, valuable enough to betray his friends, to flee across the country, to live in perpetual fear. If the artifacts truly were part of an ancient seal, perhaps Victor had removed them not just for their monetary value, but to ensure the doorway could never be fully opened, which meant they might still exist, might still be among his grandfather's possessions. With sudden determination, Ethan began searching the cabin systematically, tapping walls for hollow spaces, checking beneath floorboards, examining the ceiling for signs of hidden compartments. If Victor had kept the cabin as insurance, he might have hidden the artifacts here, close enough to maintain whatever power they held over the doorway, but secured against unauthorized access. After an hour of fruitless searching, Ethan slumped onto one of the chairs, frustrated. Shadows barking outside had intensified, taking on a desperate quality that set Ethan's nerves on edge. The journal lay on the table where he'd left it. Almost absently, he opened it again, flipping through Meredith's increasingly deranged entries until something caught his eye, a page he hadn't noticed before, where she'd drawn a peculiar symbol. It resembled a spiral with angular protrusions, unlike any language or iconography Ethan recognized. Beneath it, Meredith had written, "The key is in the dog's eye." Ethan frowned, rereading the cryptic message. The dog's eye? He glanced toward the door, where Shadow continued to bark frantically, but the phrase seemed unrelated to his pet. His gaze traveled around the cabin, searching for anything dog-related. Finally, it settled on the fireplace, specifically on an iron fire poker leaning against the stone, its handle crafted in the shape of a dog's head. Moving quickly, Ethan examined the poker. The dog's metal was a small, polished stone that caught the light strangely, seeming to shift colors depending on angle. He pressed it experimentally. With a grinding sound, a section of the stone hearth slid aside, different from the trapdoor mechanism, revealing instead a small hidden compartment. Inside lay a cloth-wrapped bundle. Ethan's hands trembled as he carefully unwrapped the cloth, revealing a small golden object about the size of his palm. It was intricately crafted in the same spiral design from Meredith's journal, embedded with stones that seemed to pulse with an inner light despite the cabin's dimness. The metal was unnaturally warm to the touch, vibrating subtly against his skin. As soon as he lifted it from its hiding place, Shadow's barking stopped abruptly. The sudden silence was more unnerving than the noise had been. "Shadow," Ethan called, moving toward the door. No response. He stepped onto the porch, the golden artifact still in his hand, and froze. Shadow stood rigid at the edge of the clearing, facing the surrounding forest. All around the perimeter, just within the tree line, stood shadowy figures. Dozens of them, their features indistinct, their forms seeming to bend the light around them. As Ethan watched, paralyzed, the figures began to move, not toward the cabin, but in a slow circle around the clearing, maintaining their distance, but clearly establishing a boundary. There would be no driving away now. The artifact pulsed warmly in his palm, the embedded stones glowing brighter in response to the shadows. From beneath the cabin came a new sound, not tapping or scratching, but a low, rhythmic humming that made the floorboards vibrate. Ethan's phone rang again. "Nora, they found Victor's safe deposit box," she said without greeting, her voice tight with urgency. "It contained a letter addressed to you, to be delivered upon his death. The bank held it because they couldn't locate anyone named Ethan Hawthorne. They didn't know about the name change." "What does it say?" Ethan asked, unable to take his eyes off the circling shadows. "It's disturbing. He talks about them coming for him, about a bargain he couldn't escape. But the important part is this. What I took must be returned. The seal must be restored. If they find the last Hawthorne, all will be lost." The humming beneath the cabin intensified, resonating with the artifact in Ethan's hand. "There's more," Nora continued. "Local geological surveys from 1974 show unusual readings around Miller's Peak, consistent with what we now know as quantum instability. Ethan, I think your grandfather stumbled onto exactly what your research has been trying to create, a natural quantum bridge." The implications hit Ethan like a physical blow. His life's work, his fortune, his reputation, all built on the theoretical framework of quantum connectivity. And all along, the proof had been buried beneath a cabin in the Appalachian Mountains. "The artifact," he murmured, studying the golden object. "It's not just valuable. It's a component of a technology we barely understand." Shadow suddenly howled, a sound of pure animal terror. The shadowy figures had stopped their circling and now stood motionless, all facing the cabin. The ground began to tremble. With horrifying clarity, Ethan understood the choice before him. The artifact in his hand was part of an ancient seal designed to keep the doorway closed. His grandfather had taken it, weakening the barrier. Now the entities on the other side had been waiting 50 years for the blood debt to be paid, for a Hawthorne to return and open the way completely. But perhaps there was another option. If he could return the artifact, restore the seal. The trapdoor inside the cabin burst open with a sound like thunder, the rusted chains snapping under impossible pressure. Shadow raced to Ethan's side, teeth bared in the direction of the dark opening now visible through the doorway. From within the darkness, the voice called again. Not a whisper now, but a chorus of voices speaking as one. "Ethan Hawthorne, the time has come to fulfill your grandfather's promise. Open the way, Shadow growled, positioning himself between Ethan and the cabin. The shadowy figures at the tree line began to advance slowly into the clearing. Trapped between two impossible threats, clutching an artifact he barely understood, Ethan had seconds to decide. Flee and hope the shadows didn't follow, enter the cabin and face whatever lurked beneath the trapdoor, or make a stand with only his loyal dog and a piece of ancient technology as protection. The golden spiral grew hotter in his palm, the stones now blazing with light. Whether it was a key, a weapon, or a component of a seal, one thing was clear: it had been waiting for him as surely as the entities had. With Shadow pressed against his leg, Ethan made his decision. Ethan clutched the golden artifact, its heat intensifying as the shadows crept closer. With Shadow pressed against his leg, he made his decision. Not flight, not surrender, but confrontation. "Stay close, boy," he whispered to Shadow as he backed slowly toward the cabin door. The shepherd whined but followed, his loyalty overcoming his terror. The trapdoor gaped open inside the cabin, a perfect square of absolute darkness that seemed to devour the surrounding light. As Ethan stepped over the threshold, the shadows of the tree line surged forward, moving with unnatural speed. Amazing viewers, this story is reaching its terrifying climax. If you're holding your breath waiting to see what happens to Ethan and Shadow, smash that subscribe button now so you never miss my newest bone-chilling tales. Let me know in the comments if you'd open that trapdoor. "Well, my grandfather took, I return," Ethan called out, holding the golden spiral above his head. The artifact pulsed in response, the embedded stones emitting a light so intense it cast stark shadows across the cabin walls. "The debt is paid." A cold laugh emanated from the trapdoor. Not one voice, but many, layered in discordant harmony. "The debt is not merely the artifact, last son of Hawthorne. Your blood is bound by promise. The way must be opened fully." The cabin door slammed shut behind him, cutting off the advancing shadow figures. For a moment, Ethan felt relief, until he realized he was now trapped inside with whatever dwelled below. Shadow's growl deepened as something began to emerge from the trapdoor. Not a person, but a churning column of darkness that moved like liquid smoke. It rose until it nearly touched the ceiling, then began to coalesce into a vaguely humanoid shape. 50 years we have waited, the entity said, its form constantly shifting, faces briefly appearing in the swirling darkness only to dissolve again. 50 years since Victor Hawthorne promised us passage in exchange for his life. "What are you?" Ethan demanded, the artifact burning almost unbearably hot in his palm. "We are the travelers, the ones who journey between. Your ancestors called us gods, then demons, then myths." The shape rippled. "We showed the Ajachu the paths between worlds. We offered the same to your grandfather and his companions. And in return, a host, a willing vessel, one sacrifice to allow many to cross." The implications hit Ethan with sickening clarity. These entities needed physical forms to fully enter this reality. His grandfather had promised them a Hawthorne vessel, himself, then betrayed them, escaping with the artifact that weakened their prison. Now they wanted Ethan to complete the bargain. Wow, the story is intensifying. If you're loving this supernatural thriller, hit that like button right now. Your support helps me bring more incredible stories like this to your screens. Now, back to the terrifying encounter in the cabin. His phone buzzed. Despite the impossible situation, Ethan glanced at the screen. Nora had sent him an image, a page from his grandfather's journal. The text was barely legible, written in a shaking hand. Asterisk the spiral key is both lock and bridge. In the proper alignment, it seals. Inverted, it opens. The price of my betrayal will be paid by my blood unless the circle is completed as intended. Asterisk attached was a crude drawing of the same spiral artifact, positioned within a larger circular pattern of similar objects. "The seal," Ethan murmured. "It wasn't just this piece. It was a complete circle of them." The shadowy entity seemed to recoil slightly. "The Ajachu seal is broken. Your grandfather ensured that when he took the final key. But something didn't add up. If Victor had wanted to ensure the doorway remained sealed, why take the component that weakened it? Unless he didn't want to weaken the seal," Ethan said slowly, understanding dawning. "He wanted to control it, to ensure no one else could open it completely without this piece. Shadow nudged Ethan's leg insistently, then looked toward the trapdoor. Following his gaze, Ethan noticed something he'd missed before: faint carvings around the opening, forming an incomplete circle. Depressions in the pattern suggested spaces where objects like the one he held would fit. Outside, the shadow figures had begun pounding on the cabin walls, the structure shaking under their assault. The entity from below stretched toward Ethan, tendrils of darkness reaching for him. The time for choice has ended. Ethan Hawthorne, you are the vessel, the final key, the fulfillment of blood debt. Ethan felt a cold pressure against his mind, an alien consciousness trying to force its way in. Shadow leaped forward, intercepting one of the dark tendrils, his jaws closing on what should have been intangible shadow. The shepherd yelped as the darkness seemed to burn him, but he held firm, buying Ethan precious seconds. If you're on the edge of your seat right now, you're not alone. This supernatural mystery is unlike anything I've shared before. Please subscribe to support my channel and get notifications about all my news stories. Your support means everything. I'm not my grandfather, Ethan declared, forcing himself toward the trapdoor despite the overwhelming urge to flee. I don't honor his bargains. I fix his mistakes. Dropping to his knees at the edge of the opening, Ethan examined the carved pattern more closely. The spiral in his hand matched one of the empty spaces perfectly. But simply returning it wouldn't be enough. The other pieces were still missing, the seal incomplete. Unless quantum theory had been the foundation of Ethan's fortune. His breakthrough had come from recognizing that information could exist in multiple states simultaneously, accessible through the right interface. If this doorway truly was a natural quantum anomaly as Nora suggested, then perhaps— Shadow, come, he commanded. The shepherd limped to his side, first singed where the dark tendrils had touched him. Ethan placed one hand on his loyal companion and raised the spiral key with the other. What was taken must be returned, he said, echoing his grandfather's words. The seal must be restored. With deliberate precision, he placed the artifact into its corresponding depression in the pattern around the trapdoor. The moment it connected, the embedded stones blazed with blinding light. The other empty spaces in the pattern began to glow in response, as if remembering what once filled them. The shadowy entity shrieked, a sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. No, the seal cannot be restored without the complete circle. It can, Ethan countered, understanding flooding through him. Because the pieces aren't really gone. They still exist in the quantum state of this anomaly, echoes of what was removed. They just need to be accessed. Drawing on everything he knew about quantum entanglement, Ethan pressed his palm against the spiral key. If his theories were correct, the artifact wasn't just a physical object, it was a junction point between realities capable of accessing information states that existed beyond normal perception. I reclaim what was taken, he declared. I restore what was broken. I revoke the bargain made in fear and sealed with betrayal. The golden spiral began to vibrate violently beneath his hand. Around the circle, shimmering outlines appeared in the empty spaces, ghostly projections of the missing pieces, growing more solid with each passing second. The entity from the trapdoor lunged toward him, but Shadow intercepted again, his loyal body absorbing another painful blow. The cabin walls creaked under the assault from outside, the wood splintering as the shadow figures fought to enter. Guys, I'm shaking as I write this. If you're feeling the tension too, please hit like and subscribe. I pour my heart into these stories, and knowing you're enjoying them keeps me creating. Now, let's see if Ethan can close this doorway before it's too late. A voice that wasn't the entity's, older, weaker, but achingly familiar, whispered in Ethan's mind. Asterisk, complete the circle, grandson. Finish what I was too much of a coward to do. Asterisk, with sudden clarity, Ethan understood what he needed to do. The final piece of the seal wasn't just the spiral key. It was the sacrifice his grandfather had promised, but never fulfilled. Not a human vessel for the travelers to possess, but a different kind of offering. Blood calls to blood, Ethan murmured. Taking a breath, he drew his pocket knife and sliced his palm, letting his blood, Hawthorne blood, drip onto the golden spiral. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The artifact absorbed the crimson droplets, the embedded stones changing from brilliant white to deep, pulsing red. The ghostly outlines of the missing pieces suddenly solidified, completing the circle around the trapdoor. Each began to glow with the same red light, creating a perfect ring of power. The entity shrieked again, its form destabilizing as the completed seal began to pull it back toward the opening. No, the bargain was made. A Hawthorne promised, and a Hawthorne is paid, Ethan replied grimly. Not with possession, but with blood freely given to close what should never have been opened. The seal blazed brighter, the red light expanding to form a dome over the trapdoor. The shadowy entity was dragged inexorably toward the opening, its form stretching and tearing as it fought against the pull. Outside, the pounding on the cabin walls suddenly ceased. Through the windows, Ethan could see the shadow figures retreating, dissolving like mist in morning sunlight. The entity made one final, desperate lunge toward Ethan, a tendril of darkness wrapping around his throat. Shadow, loyal to the last, leaped forward and sank his teeth into the darkness, refusing to let go even as the contact burned him. Shadow, Ethan cried, reaching for his faithful companion. But it was too late. Dog and darkness were both pulled toward the trapdoor, vanishing into its depths as the seal completed its work. No. Ethan scrambled toward the opening, but the red light formed an impenetrable barrier. Below, he caught a glimpse of Shadow falling into infinite darkness, still locked in combat with the entity. Then, suddenly, a new figure appeared in the void, the translucent form of an elderly man reaching out to catch the falling dog. His grandfather's spirit, somehow present in this liminal space between realities. I'll take him from here, Ethan, Victor's voice echoed. One final act of courage to atone for a lifetime of cowardice. Before Ethan could respond, the trapdoor slammed shut with such force that the entire cabin shuddered. The red light flared once more, then faded, leaving the seal glowing with a soft, steady pulse. The spiral key and the now solid echoes of the other pieces had fused with the wood, forming a permanent barrier. Silence fell. The oppressive presence that had filled the cabin since Ethan's arrival was gone, replaced by ordinary mountain stillness. But Shadow was gone too, lost to the darkness along with the spectral form of his grandfather. Ethan slumped against the sealed trapdoor, blood still seeping from his palm, grief overwhelming him. First his family, now Shadow, everyone he loved, taken from him. I'm sorry, boy, he whispered. You deserved better. A faint scratching sound came from beneath the sealed door, not the menacing scrape of the entity, but the familiar sound of paws digging. Then, impossibly, a whine he would recognize anywhere. Ethan pressed his ear to the floor. Shadow. The whining grew louder, more insistent. But how? The doorway was sealed, the entities banished. Unless, Ethan recalled his grandfather's words. The spiral key is both lock and bridge. In sealing the doorway to the traveler's realm, had he inadvertently created a different kind of passage? A safe connection to whatever dimensional space existed on the other side? A loud bark confirmed Shadow's presence, seemingly just inches away through solid wood. Ethan's scientific mind raced with possibilities. Quantum tunneling, dimensional folding, theories he'd explored theoretically in his research, now manifesting in ways he'd never imagined. Placing his bloody palm against the sealed trapdoor, Ethan closed his eyes and focused on the connection he'd always shared with Shadow. Come home, boy, he whispered. Find a way back to me. The seal pulsed once more, the red light briefly returning. Then, impossibly, Shadow's head emerged through what should have been solid wood, as if the floor had become permeable only to him. The shepherd pulled himself through, whole and unharmed, leaping into Ethan's arms with joyful whines. Good boy, Ethan whispered, burying his face in Shadow's fur. The best boy. As dawn broke over Miller's Peak, Ethan stood on the cabin porch, Shadow beside him, surveying the peaceful clearing. No trace remained of the shadow figures that had surrounded them hours before. His phone showed dozens of missed calls from Nora, but those could wait. He'd discovered something far more valuable than the quantum technology that had made him a billionaire. He'd found the truth about his family's past, confronted the legacy of his grandfather's choices, and somehow, against all odds, managed to correct a 50-year-old mistake. The sealed trapdoor would remain closed, the travelers contained behind a barrier that now carried his own blood as its final component. What his grandfather had broken through fear and selfishness, Ethan had restored through courage and sacrifice. Shadow nudged his hand, ready to leave this place behind. As they walked toward the Land Rover, Ethan glanced back at the cabin one last time. He wouldn't sell it or abandon it as his grandfather had. Someone needed to watch over the seal to ensure it remained intact. Perhaps Elena Reyes would know someone suitable for the task, someone who understood the importance of keeping some doors forever closed. Or perhaps, Ethan thought as he scratched Shadow behind the ears, this mysterious cabin on Miller's Peak might become exactly what he'd originally intended, a retreat from the world. Not for writing or relaxation, but for exploring the quantum boundaries his company had only begun to understand. After all, not all doors between realities needed to remain sealed. Some, with the proper guardianship, might safely be explored. Shadow barked once, as if in agreement, before jumping into the passenger seat. Whatever came next, they would face it together. 3 months after sealing the trapdoor, Ethan Hawthorne stood before the board of directors at Quantum Core Technologies, presenting the most audacious proposal of his career. "Gentlemen, ladies," he said, gesturing to the holographic display behind him, "what you're looking at is a completely new framework for quantum interface technology. One that doesn't just process quantum information, it actively bridges dimensional boundaries." The directors exchanged skeptical glances. Since returning from Miller's Peak, Ethan had thrown himself into research with an intensity that surprised even those accustomed to his obsessive work habits. But this was something else entirely. "Mr. Hawthorne," began Patricia Williams, the longest-serving board member, "while we appreciate your enthusiasm, these concepts seem more theoretical than practical. The shareholders expect growth," Ethan interrupted gently. "And what I'm proposing will redefine not just our company, but human understanding of reality itself." Incredible readers. We're reaching the mind-blowing conclusion of Ethan's supernatural journey. If you've been on the edge of your seat throughout this story, smash that subscribe button right now. I bring new thrilling tales like this regularly, and you won't want to miss a single one. Shadow, who now accompanied Ethan everywhere, shifted at his feet. The German Shepherd had changed since their experience at the cabin. His eyes held an intelligence beyond normal canine comprehension, and occasionally, when shadows grew long in the evening, he seemed to perceive things invisible to human eyes. The board eventually approved Ethan's proposal. Not that they had much choice. As majority shareholder and the brilliant mind behind the company's success, Ethan rarely encountered serious opposition. But even he recognized the radical nature of his new direction. Later that evening, as his private helicopter approached the familiar clearing in the Appalachian Mountains, Ethan reflected on how completely his life had transformed in just 3 months. The cabin had been renovated, not into the luxury retreat he'd initially imagined, but into a research facility unlike any other. The sealed trapdoor remained undisturbed, encased in a transparent chamber monitored by sensors that recorded its subtle quantum fluctuations. Around it, a team of carefully selected scientists, all vetted by Elena Reyes herself, studied the unique properties of what Ethan now called the threshold. Elena waited on the landing pad, her silver-streaked hair whipping in the helicopter's downdraft. Since the events of that fateful night, she had become Ethan's most trusted advisor on matters beyond scientific understanding. Her knowledge of Ajaccio lore, combined with his quantum expertise, had yielded insights neither could have achieved alone. The new equipment arrived, she informed him as they walked toward the cabin. Dr. Chun thinks she's detected a pattern in the seal's energy emissions. OMG, friends, this story combines ancient mysteries with cutting-edge science in a way that gives me chills. If you're loving this blend of supernatural horror and quantum theory, please hit that like button to let me know. Your support helps me craft more incredible stories like this one. The interior of the cabin bore little resemblance to the abandoned shell Ethan had purchased. Advanced technology lined the walls, centered around the sealed trapdoor. Dr. Nora Chun, whom Ethan had promoted from executive assistant to head of theoretical research, looked up from her console as they entered. "It's communicating," she said without preamble. "Not the entities, they remain contained." But the seal itself, the patterns aren't random. They're structured, almost like code. Ethan wasn't surprised. Since that night, he had suspected the Ajachu had created more than a simple barrier. The seal was a technology so advanced it had been mistaken for magic, a selective membrane between realities designed to contain harmful entities while allowing beneficial exchanges. "Show me," he said, approaching the transparent chamber. The spiral key, his spiral, marked with his blood, pulsed with gentle light at the center of the pattern. Around it, the other components of the seal maintained a perfect geometric formation, occasionally shifting in subtle ways that defied conventional physics. Shadow padded forward, pressing his nose against the chamber's edge. Since emerging from the sealed doorway, the shepherd had developed an uncanny connection to the seal. Sometimes, Ethan would find him sitting beside it for hours, as if listening to voices only he could hear. "Your grandfather has been trying to reach you," Elena said quietly. Through the dog. Ethan nodded. He'd sensed it too. Moments when Shadow's eyes seemed to hold Victor's consciousness, conveying wordless apologies and warnings. Has he found peace? I believe so. His sacrifice helped balance the debt. But there's more to learn. Elena hesitated. The townspeople are talking. Word has spread about what happened here. Some see you as a protector, others as a fool disturbing forces better left alone. Wow, everyone. The mystery deepens even as we reach our conclusion. If you're invested in finding out what happens to Ethan, Shadow, and the secrets of the quantum seal, hit subscribe now. I post new stories every week, and your subscription ensures you'll never miss one. Let them talk, Ethan replied. What matters is that the seal holds. And hold it had, not just containing the travelers, but revealing new possibilities. Through careful study, Ethan's team had discovered that the quantum anomaly beneath Miller's Peak was just one of several worldwide. The Ajachu had identified and sealed these natural gateways centuries ago, understanding both their potential and their danger. Now, with the integration of modern quantum theory and ancient wisdom, quantum core technologies was on the verge of a breakthrough that would transform human understanding of the universe. Not by opening dangerous doorways as his grandfather had accidentally done, but by learning to navigate the subtle connections between realities that had always existed. That evening, as moonlight filtered through the trees surrounding the cabin, Ethan sat on the porch with Shadow, a glass of whiskey in hand. The mountain air was crisp with approaching winter, carrying the scent of pine and wood smoke from the town below. "We've come full circle, boy," he murmured, scratching behind Shadow's ears. The shepherd leaned into his touch, eyes reflecting the starlight with unnatural clarity. For a moment, brief but unmistakable, Shadow's gaze held a human awareness. Not threatening or alien like the entities from beyond the seal, but familiar, apologetic. His grandfather, reaching across the boundary one last time. "Understand now," Ethan said quietly. "You were afraid. You made a terrible choice. But in the end, you try to make it right." Shadow whined softly, the sound carrying emotions no dog should be capable of expressing. Then, with a gentle sigh, the presence faded, leaving only faithful Shadow looking up at his master with normal canine devotion. Ethan felt a profound sense of closure. The family debt was paid, the cycle broken. Whatever his grandfather had set in motion 50 years ago had finally reached its resolution. His phone chimed with a message from Nora. Asterisk breakthrough in Lab 3. The modified quantum interface is showing unprecedented stability. We can direct the connection now. Asterisk, amazing readers. As our story concludes, I want to sincerely thank you for joining me on this supernatural journey. Your support means everything to me. If you enjoyed this tale of ancient mysteries and modern science, please subscribe, like, and share with friends who love spine-tingling stories. This was the future Ethan had envisioned after his experience at the cabin. Not exploiting dangerous doorways or making bargains with entities from beyond, but developing safe, controlled methods of accessing the quantum information that flowed between realities, applications that could revolutionize medicine, communication, energy. The possibilities were endless. As dawn broke over the mountains, Ethan made a decision. He would maintain the cabin and the research facility, protecting the seal and exploring its secrets. But his primary focus would return to Seattle, to guiding Quantum Core's evolution with the wisdom he'd gained from confronting his family's dark legacy. The people of Miller's Peak had made their peace with his presence. Elena had helped bridge the gap, explaining that Ethan's work was containing the strange forces that had haunted the town for generations. Slowly, the hostility had given way to cautious acceptance. 1 year later, Ethan stood in the center of Quantum Core's new dimensional research wing. Shadow is always by his side. Before him stretched a technology that hadn't existed before his encounter in the cabin, a stable, controlled quantum interface that could access information across dimensional boundaries without creating dangerous openings. "Begin the sequence," he instructed his team. As the interface activated, displaying data from what theoretical physicists had previously called inaccessible quantum states, Ethan felt a profound sense of accomplishment. His grandfather had stumbled upon these forces by accident, unleashing something he couldn't control. Ethan had contained it, understood it, and now harnessed it safely. Shadow pressed against his leg, a reassuring weight grounding him in this reality while his mind contemplated others. The cabin on Miller's Peak remained a special place, not just a research facility, but a reminder of how thin the boundaries between worlds could be. Ethan visited monthly, maintaining both the physical structure and the relationships he'd built with the townspeople. The seal remained intact, occasionally pulsing with energy, but never weakening. Sometimes, on quiet nights when a mountain winds whispered through the trees, Ethan would sit on the porch with Shadow and think about all that might have been lost had he not confronted the darkness beneath the floorboards. The entities remained contained, the doorway sealed by his blood and his grandfather's final sacrifice. But other, more beneficial connections have been opened, bridges of understanding between science and tradition, between quantum theory and ancient wisdom. Elena now led a team documenting Ajacha knowledge, preserving insights that might otherwise have been lost to history. As for the golden spiral artifact that had started it all, it remained at the center of the seal, a permanent anchor between realities. Sometimes, when Shadow slept beside the transparent chamber that housed it, he would whimper and twitch, as if running through distant landscapes no human had ever seen. Ethan had learned to trust those dreams, understanding that his faithful companion now navigated the subtle boundaries between worlds in ways humans could only theorize about. Shadow had become more than a pet. He was a guide, occasionally bringing back impressions and insights from realms beyond ordinary perception. The cabin that had once been haunted by darkness now served as a beacon of discovery. The $500 impulse purchase that had nearly cost Ethan his life had instead given him purpose beyond wealth and technology. In confronting his family's darkest secret, he had found his greatest strength, and in a realm beyond ordinary reality, a debt that had festered for 50 years was finally paid in full. I hope you enjoyed this supernatural journey through quantum mysteries and family secrets. I'd love to know where you're all watching from. Please drop a comment below telling me what part of the world you're in and what you thought of Ethan and Shadow's adventure. Your comments make my day and help me create more stories tailored to what you love.